And we're back. 1 Samuel chapter 29. The Philistines mustered all their troops at Aphek. Meanwhile, Israel had made camp at the spring at Jezreel. As the Philistine warlords marched forward by regiments and divisions, David and his men were bringing up the rear with Achish. The Philistine officers said, "What business do these Hebrews have being here?" Achish answered them, the officers, "Don't you recognize David, ex-servant of King Saul of Israel? He's been with me a long time. I found nothing to be suspicious of, nothing to complain about, from the day he defected from Saul until now." Angry with Achish, the Philistine officers said, "Send this man back to where he came from. Let him stick to his normal duties. He's not going into battle with us. He'd switch sides in the middle of the fight. What better chance to get back in favor with his master than by stabbing us in the back? Isn't this the same David that they celebrate at their parties, singing, 'Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000'? So Achish had to send for David and tell him, "As God lives, you've been a trusty ally. Excellent in all the ways you have worked with me, beyond reproach in the ways you have conducted yourself. But the warlords don't see it that way. So it's best that you leave peacefully now. It's not worth it, displeasing the Philistine warlords." "But what have I done?" said David. "Have you had a single cause for complaint from the day I joined up with you until now? Why can't I fight against the enemies of my master the king?" "I agree," said Achish. "You're a good man. As far as I'm concerned, God's angel." But the Philistine officers were emphatic. "He's not to go with us into battle, so get an early start. You and the men who came with you, as soon as you have light enough to travel, go." David rose early, he and his men, and by daybreak they were on their way back to Philistine country. The Philistines went on to Jezreel. 1 Samuel chapter 30. 3 days later, David and his men arrived back in Ziklag. Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They tore Ziklag to pieces and then burnt it down. They captured all the women, young and old. They didn't kill anyone, but drove them like a herd of cattle. By the time David and his men entered the village, it had been burnt to the ground, and their wives, sons, and daughters all taken prisoner. David and his men burst out in loud wails, wept and wept until they were exhausted with weeping. David's two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, widow of Nabal of Carmel, had been taken prisoner along with the rest. And suddenly David was in even worse trouble. There was talk among the men, bitter over the loss of their families, of stoning him. David strengthened himself with trust in his God. He ordered Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod so I can consult God." Abiathar brought it to David. Then David prayed to God, "Shall I go after these raiders? Can I catch them?" The answer came, "Go after them. Yes, you'll catch them. Yes, you'll make the rescue." David went, he and his 600 men with him. They arrived at Brook Besor, where some of them dropped out. David and 400 men kept up the pursuit, but 200 of them were too fatigued to cross the brook Besor and stayed there. Some who went on came across an Egyptian in a field and took him to David. They gave him bread and he ate, and he drank some water. They gave him a piece of fig cake and a couple of raisin muffins. Life began to revive in him. He hadn't eaten or drunk a thing for 3 days and nights. David said to him, "Who do you belong to? Where are you from?" "I'm an Egyptian slave of an Amalekite," he said. "My master walked off and left me when I got sick. That was 3 days ago. We had raided the Negev of the Kerethites, of Judah, and of Caleb. Ziklag we burned." David asked him, "Can you take us to the raiders?" "Promise me by God," he said, "that you won't kill me or turn me over to my old master, and I'll take you straight to the raiders." He led David to them. They were scattered all over the place, eating and drinking, gorging themselves on all the loot they had plundered from Philistia and Judah. David pounced. He fought them from before sunrise until evening of the next day. None got away except for 400 of the younger men who escaped by riding off on camels. David rescued everything the Amalekites had taken, and he rescued his 2 wives. Nothing and no one was missing, young or old, son or daughter, plunder or whatever. David recovered the whole lot. He herded the sheep and cattle before them, and they all shouted, "David's plunder." Then David came to the 200 who had been too tired to continue with him and had dropped out at the brook Besor. They came out to welcome David and his band. As he came near, he called out, "Success!" But all the mean-spirited men who had marched with David, the rabble element, objected. "They didn't help in the rescue. They don't get any of the plunder we recovered. Each man can have his wife and children, but that's it. Take them and go. Families don't do this sort of thing." "Oh no, my brothers," said David, as he broke up the argument. "You can't act this way with what God gave us. God kept us safe. He handed over the raiders who attacked us. Who would ever listen to this kind of talk? The share of the one who stays with the gear is the share of the one who fights. Equal shares, share and share alike." From that day on, David made that the rule in Israel, and it still is. On returning to Ziklag, David sent portions of the plunder to the elders of Judah, his neighbors, with a note saying, "A gift from the plunder of God's enemies." He sent them to the elders in Bethel, Ramoth Negev, Jatir, Aroer, Sifmoth, Eshtemoa, Rakal, Jerahmeelite cities, Kenite cities, Hormah, Bor Ashon, Athak, and Hebron, along with the number of other places David and his men went to from time to time. 1 Samuel chapter 31. The Philistines made war on Israel. The men of Israel were in full retreat from the Philistines, falling left and right, wounded on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines caught up with Saul and his sons. They killed Jonathon, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle was hot and heavy around Saul. The archers got his range and wounded him badly. Saul said to his weapon bearer, "Draw your sword and put me out of my misery, lest these pagan pigs come and make a game out of killing me." But his weapon bearer wouldn't do it. He was terrified. So Saul took the sword himself and fell on it. When the weapon bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, and his weapon bearer, the men closest to him, died together that day. When the Israelites in the valley opposite of those on the other side of the Jordan saw that their army was in full retreat and that Saul and his sons were dead, they left their cities and ran for their lives. The Philistines moved in and occupied the cities. The next day, when the Philistines came to rob the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons dead on Mount Gilboa. They cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor. Then they spread the good news all through Philistine country in the shrines of their idols and among the people. They displayed his armor in the shrine of the Ashtaroth. They nailed his corpse to the wall at Beth Shan. The people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul. Their valiant men sprang into action. They traveled all night, took the corpse of Saul and his 3 sons from the wall at Beth Shan, and carried them back to Jabesh and burned off the flesh. They then buried the bones under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted in mourning for 7 days. Amen.